Okay, Miriam, you're on.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Miriam Kabakov, the Executive Director and co-founder of Eshel. We're an organization that works to create a future for Orthodox LGBTQ people and their families. The stories told in the film Marry Me, However, which some of you may have seen or will see, are stories we hear every day through our warm line support groups from rabbis and educators, parents, and children. We're so pleased to be partnering with JOFA, an organization that also seeks to make a place within Orthodoxy for those who often feel marginalized. Today, we're highlighting the experience of the ex-spouse of an LGBTQ person who comes out while in a heterosexual marriage. Often overlooked, the spouse in such a marriage is the casualty of a society that doesn't recognize the differences or diversity in it. Teens are coming out younger and younger in Orthodox circles, as they are universally. And the sooner we can make space for these teens to grow into full-fledged Orthodox adults with a future, the stronger our communities will be and the healthier its members. So I want to thank all of you for being here, and thank you to JOFA for making this screening possible. I'm handing it over now to Daphne Lazar-Price, Executive Director of JOFA and a colleague of mine. Take it away, Daphne. Daphne, I think you're muted.
Sorry. Wow, you would think 2 years into the pandemic, I would have gotten that right. Just to start again, my name is Daphne Lazar-Price. I'm the Executive Director of JOFA, where since 1997, we have been advocating for the advancement of women to create a vibrant and equitable Orthodox community. And I want to welcome all of you to this conversation. Thanks to those of you who have had a chance to screen the film already. I came upon this film when I watched it as part of the DCJCC Film Festival this past summer, and I immediately reached out to Eshel and said, this is a story that needs to be told, or these are stories that need to be told, and we put together this panel conversation. So I'm just going to do a quick round of introductions of our esteemed panel. We have Dr. Giti Bendheim, who is a psychologist and psychoanalyst in private practice in New York. She takes a special interest in advanced women's education, both in America and in Israel. She was a founding member of the Orthodox Caucus and serves on the Board of Education at SAR Academy, the board of Furkov Graduate School of Psychology of Yeshiva University, and JOFA. She has also been involved as a participant in Drisha and Matan, as well as Nishmat, and she occasionally writes on topics related to women in Judaism. She lives in Riverdale, New York, with her spouse. Rabbinic Nechama Barash made Aliyah from Philadelphia over 20 years ago after graduating from Stern College. She studied for 3 years in Matan's Advanced Talmud Institute and finished a master's degree in Talmud at Bar Ilan. She's a graduate of Nishmat Yotzat Halacha program and has been certified to teach brides before their weddings, as well as qualifying as a sex educator through Yachel community, through Yachel and the Eden Center, and is an advocate for religious LGBTQ members of the community through various fora. And finally, we have Shoni Braun, who was born and raised in a yeshivish Orthodox family. She was married at 19, is a mother of 4, divorced after 18 years of marriage after her husband came out of the closet. Obviously, this film has elicited a lot of feelings and responses, and we're actually going to ask Shani to share her experiences as somebody who actually had this lived experience. So Shani, why don't you share with everyone a little bit about how this impacted you and your family over the last 12 years or so?
First of all, I just want to say thank you for having me. It's been 12 years for me, and the fact that this is even happening is pretty huge, and I'm pretty excited about it. Basically, as you summed up in your introduction, I was married for 18 years and my husband came out. And at the time, it was really rough. My children were about 14 or 15 and under. And I had a great marriage. We had a great family life, and everything pretty much that my children and I knew was upended. And for me, being the adult and having a therapist and having, you know, a sister who was really so supportive for me and everything like that, it was obviously a lot, I don't want to say easier, but more manageable to navigate. And being an adult, I had the tools to do the navigating. However, it was really difficult for my kids, and it had a lot of varying effects on their growth in the last 12 years. It was very scary. And some of the things that I noticed were that there was hardly any support. As soon as my husband at the time came out, it was scary how, and my husband was such a huge contributor to the community, both financially and just as a member. He volunteered, he was so very much a part of the community. And then all of a sudden he came out, and it was like all of that meant nothing. And he was turned away by many community members. And because I supported him, I didn't feel welcome either. And that was really sad. And it turned me off. I left Orthodoxy because of it. And I don't think my children left because of it, but I'm certain it did not encourage them to stay. And that's part of why I feel like this is so important, because the awareness is such a huge piece. The more we can get it out there that this exists and that we can't sweep it under the rug, and that if we, you know, don't talk about it, it's not there, which is such a huge way in at least the Orthodox world from where I'm from. We have to get it out there that that's not the case. We have to talk about it. It is there. And we have to figure out how to help the next generation, at the very least, if not the current, to not be in a position where they get married and they bring in a spouse who is kept in the dark, and then they have children who are kept in the dark. And then one day our lives are just turned upside down. And it's not just me and my children, it's my parents and my siblings and his parents and his siblings. And the domino effect is unbelievable. And it's not fair. It's not fair to anyone. And then once all of that unfolds on everybody else, and there's so much blame that's thrown back on the person that came out, which is also so unfair, because everyone knows that person has had enough to carry. They don't need all of that as well. So I guess in my eyes, the question is how to help mitigate all of that and preempt it so that it doesn't go that way, and so that everyone can manage in a more healthy way to just live their best happy lives and not keep secrets and feel supported and feel part of a community and, just be healthy. So I feel very privileged to be part of this for that reason.
Okay, I'm Giti Bendheim. I'm going to use my few minutes to both respond to what Shani has just told us and to respond to the film that I think many of you have seen. I think that the underlying issue in all of these really painful stories that we saw in the film and in Shani's story that she just told us is a fundamental lack of awareness and a lack of attention that's paid to issues of sexuality in the halakhically observant community. On the one hand, there's this tremendous pressure to marry, and in many cases, especially in the yeshivish world, to marry early. And this has a lot of drivers. I think one of them is to attempt to prevent premarital sex. And then I guess most importantly, a true belief that a happy heterosexual marriage is a great source of satisfaction the best way for those who aim to live a fulfilling halachic life, and also a true commitment to the mitzvah of having children. But I think that this movie and Shani's story expose a further, more particular pressure for early marriage, because here we see it functioning in a way to short circuit doubts and worries. And these doubts and worries are on the part of individuals and their advisors, whether they be rabbis or others, about sexual orientation, and to create the appearance of a heteronormative marriage in cases where things are far more complicated. And though the rabbis and advisors might be very sincere in their belief that marriage is going to overcome or even solve what they see as the quote problem, the truth is that this really misguided purported solution only exacerbates the situation, creating and spreading much more serious harm, the harm that Shani just spoke to us about, to themselves, to the spouse, to their extended families, etc. This movie shines a light on the plights of both gay men and gay women who are suffering greatly, trying to reconcile the conflicting forces of their sexuality and their religious lives. But what I thought the movie was most clear about was showing that even when the gay party is a man who suffers very much, it's not only the man who suffers the consequent shame, stigmatization, and all of the other things that we just heard about. As Shani has shown us, women are the unacknowledged collateral damage here, and women and children, actually, in these situations, as they're often the innocent sacrifices to a system that worries more about protecting its men. Of course, I'm using the word protecting very ironically, because that very protection is actually a form of oppression, as is the devaluation of the women who are unwittingly used in this deception. And I believe it's pretty unwitting. I think it's something that our religious leaders have not allowed themselves or brought themselves to think about deeply. And I think stories like Shani's can help them understand the terrible costs of this misguided approach. But given all of this, there's been a deep reluctance in the community to address sexual issues in a thorough and a timely way. As we saw in the movie, some young people have only the very vaguest idea of what sexuality is all about. And there's a way that maintaining this ignorance actually is felt to serve the community, as it allows the community to deny the seriousness of differing sexual orientations, and thus to ignore the consequences of the denial, hoping that it will all just go away. But as we see from this movie, it doesn't all just go away, it just gets worse, as hard as some may have tried to make that happen by following misguided advice or fervently wishing or fervently praying. But however threatening it might seem to the halachic system to take a good look at the situation and to open up that closet door and to let in some oxygen, it's far more destructive of the emotional and physical lives of people in the LGBTQ plus community to keep it shut. This cannot be the price that we as ethical human beings in an ethical community can afford to pay. And frankly, as Shani has pointed out, it's destructive to the whole community to have to play out and witness the kind of hypocrisy that she spoke about today, and for the community to lose some of its most vital members because of an identity that they haven't chosen. From a psychological point of view, we're left with the need for education at every level. And I feel like here I'm preaching to the chorus, but I know that we're all going to be sounding this gong, but education is and openness is what this is all about at every level, for rabbis, for parents, for adolescents, even for the mental health community, about heteronormative sexuality and about LGBTQ plus sexuality. And unfortunately, we now find ourselves in a situation where we need to address the trauma that's engendered by attempts to suppress what the community can't deal with. Awareness of the issues around sexual development and sexual orientation will allow people to, number one, accept themselves, even when those selves feel difficult or problematic to them, and to feel that they can still preserve their space and their place in a society that accepts them. And I believe that the more it's discussed, the less it's stigmatized, and the more open people will be able to be to themselves and to others about their sexual orientation. I believe that the Rabbinic, and perhaps our community in general, may be afraid that such an approach is going to encourage homosexuality. But I believe that a candid and honest discussion in the right spaces will actually reduce the role that the fear of homosexuality plays in the Orthodox community. I think it's important here to pay some attention to the issues of fear and choice, because I think that some of the reluctance to have this discussion is a worry that homosexuality will be looked at by developing teens as a choice. And it is true that it is very common to experiment during adolescence, and that adolescence is a vulnerable and often confusing time. But for me, that only underscores the need for well-informed and extremely thoughtful educators. None of the people in this film simply opted for a gay lifestyle. I think it would be fair to say that they fought against it, much to the suffering of themselves and their loved ones. But I believe it is the mandate of the rabbinic community to find ways to create a place for people who want to lead the Jewish lives they've always known and loved, that Shani spoke about, in a way that can be possible for them. As a psychologist, I know that there are many in the psychological community who would welcome the opportunity to partner with the rabbis in that endeavor. I don't have the answers to how to do this. I just know that the rabbinic community must show that they're trying to find a way. And I guess that opens things up for you, Nechama. And though I saw goodwill and empathy and thoughtfulness and even some regret among the many rabbinic and pastoral figures in this movie, I'm left with the feeling that the rabbis feel stuck. And though one rabbi understood that homosexuality was an identity rather than a pathology, and another advised his questioner to keep Shabbos and to bring his question to God, no one offered a way in. And I really, really hope that we can do better. Thank you.
Rabbanit Nechama, you're up. But I also, in addition to responding to what Dr. Bendheim said, I also want to note that Rabbanit Nechama was in the film and may have some nuance to add about what it was like to be in this project.
Thank you. So I'm going to respond to what it was like to be in the film. But first, I really want to heighten or maybe deepen the challenge that is facing Orthodoxy, Rabbinic Judaism, traditional religious lifestyles before I then perhaps give a critique or suggestions for some sort of educational, religious educational approach. It is no less challenging than what has happened in the last 100 years with regard to women. In other words, traditional Judaism, like much of traditional society, has been built on a very clear binary where men and women, if we talk about religion, have very clear roles to play. And it's really only in the last 100 years, 150 years, with the introduction of widespread education, and which led to, of course, feminism much later on, that Orthodoxy was challenged, and not just in Judaism, in Christianity as well, and in Islam as well, and in, I'm sure, I can only speak about the religions I'm somewhat familiar with the question of what to do when the binary structure of what a man is, what a woman is, no longer is existing. And of course, the world wars played a role, and education, and so on and so forth. And so until about 30 years ago, a man married a woman. That was just the way of the world across the spectrum. And both women challenging gender roles, and now this idea of what does marriage look like, what is sexuality, what is committed relationship, is really challenging the foundation of a religion that's thousands of years old and that has unfolded in a particular way. And so I am going to talk about compassion and kindness, and I am going to talk about rabbinic authority and halachic solutions, but I don't want to minimize why this is such an acute challenge and why this brings up such strong emotions. Because religious identity, and again, not just in Judaism, I'm going to focus on Judaism, but religious identity demanded fidelity to the idea that God created men and women in order that a man cleave to a woman and leave his mother and father, right? Another heterosexual relationship in order to become one flesh. And the word davak is used, right? Dveikut, which is a word that illuminates the relationship between God and Bnei Israel. So I want to at least set out and at least give some credibility to the contentiousness of the conversation, because it's a new conversation, not that there weren't people having same-sex sexual relationships. We have documentation of that, Jewish texts about that dating back at least 2,000 years, right? However, the idea of being in partnership or being gay or having same-sex attraction as the only sexual identity is a relatively new phenomenon. And I think there has to be some room given to that. And I often, because I speak in many spaces, will point out that outside of Orthodoxy, both the Reform movement and the conservative movement took their time to get to acceptance as well. It's not a small challenge, and I'd like to at least acknowledge that before we move forward. When you ask me about what it was like to be in the movie was complicated. I mean, when Mordechai Vardi approached me, we are colleagues in a rabbinic organization called Beit Hillel. I can only talk more about what's going on in Israel, but it's a wonderful organization. Men and women, Rabbanim, Rabbaniyot, sit together on both social and halachic issues and topics and so on. And several years ago, Beit Hillel took it upon themselves to really become more educated and invited members from the LGBTQ community, the religious community, to come and speak and really illuminate for us their experiences. And a tshuva was put out that didn't make either community happy. The religious community attacked Beit Hillel for being too liberal, and the LGBTQ community felt we were too conservative, which means we were somewhere in the middle. But in the course of that process, I got to know Rabbi Vardi, and he asked me if I would host an evening. One of these scenes is in my living room, and we invited the son of a lesbian woman who is married to another woman right now, and we invited. So just to remind you what scene that was, and I would see that was a wonderful evening. I invited members from my community to come, and really it was a very positive experience, because I felt that people really came to listen to the speakers and left being educated. So if Giti was talking about the power of education, of presenting information, listening to stories, and people come in with an open mind, that can be transformative, where people come and are invited, especially into smaller spaces, where you don't have to look over your shoulder all the time, right? As who's here, who's not here, what's this one going to think about me, right? The intimacy of being invited into someone's home and listening to stories and being able to ask questions was a very powerful medium. Now, it's small, right? You can only do so much, but sometimes small and effective is better than big and ineffective. So I would say that scene was really a very positive experience for me. And I've since met the mother of the young man who was in the film, and I've gone on to do other things. There's another scene in there, though, in which I appear. Rabbi Vardi, Mordechai, apologized for cutting all of the dialogue because he had to make whatever cuts. So I did have a lot to say, but I actually do not speak in the film. But in the second scene, I would say that was one of the most difficult experiences of my life, meaning I was invited into a hostile environment to be a moderate voice. It was a hostile rabbinic environment in which there was a lot of anti-gay kind of rhetoric couched in religious language. And there were a few of us who were more moderate, but I was there for about 5 hours. And I remember I was shaking the entire time. Like I felt very, it was painful to hear how verbally aggressive the language could get. And yet I thought, this too, I have to steel myself to listen to, because much of the religious world is still in that space. And if there's any hope of kind of changing attitudes, I have to go into the heart of the beast, so to speak. I can't only hang out with the rabbis, rabbaniyot, and educators who are aligning with a more moderate perspective, with a more human-centered perspective in terms of how they address these issues. I really need to go into the spaces where there's a lot of antagonism and a lot of, I would say, vitriol over this phenomena from people who are very well regarded and are rabbinic leaders in their community. And I would say that was a very difficult experience for me, and yet one that taught me a lot about how much work there still is to do to even get to a place where we can begin talking about support and compassion for someone in Shani's situation, right? And so, you know, I really, as I said, in the last number of years, 15, 20 years, I have taken it upon myself both to self-educate, be self-present, be there for my students who are members of the LGBTQ community, particularly at Pardes, which is a very safe space for members of all communities to come and study Torah. But part of my process was being able to set aside preconceptions, fears, and so on in order to listen. That's not a simple thing to do. And the question is, how do we begin to both motivate others in order to do that? And so, so it's complicated, and a lot has happened in the last, I would say, I often say the last 20 plus years till Trembling Before God came out, where I really see that as a turning point in terms of people beginning to recognize this is not going away. This is not something that you can convert someone out of. I'll say this week in Israel, there was an announcement that the Ministry of Health is coming out opposing all forms of conversion therapy. It's caused tremendous, a kind of controversy within certain circles, but largely, obviously, in others, very much welcomed. And you know, it's taken time to even get to a place where people can acknowledge that we can't just convert someone away from this kind of attraction. That really was the big white hope, so to speak, of 30 years ago and 25 years ago and 20 years ago and 15 years ago and 10 years ago. And now gradually people are coming to understand that that really is an impossibility. So where does that leave us? And I'm happy to keep talking. I'm happy to take directed questions. That leaves us with, for starters, the Ben Adam L'Chaveiro piece really is a great place to start. And there's a lot of work to do there. The halachic answers to what are we going to do in a meta-halachic way, that we're not close to that. However, I truly believe that all communities, all rabbinic leaders, authorities, pastoral counselors, educators, parents, right, can be brought to a place of understanding and acceptance, better education, transparency, what was brought up, what Giti brought up, this idea of let's start talking about this in elementary school, in high school. It's late if we only start talking about it after people get married. And this idea that people don't really have an awareness of what their sexuality is. So one of the things that stood out for me in the film, because this is a very classic rabbinic move, today young men who have same-sex attraction will be told that they have to inform their intended that they are attracted to the other sex, right? It happens in the movie in one of the couples. But if a woman has no baseline to understand what sexuality is, or what that's going to mean for her on a monthly basis when she goes to the mikvah, and she's been trained to or educated to believe this is going to be the night of unbelievable sexual intimacy, and month after month there's rejection, right? That's where we failed, because we've created a model as if he's informed her so she knows, but if neither of them have any sexual experience, they don't know anything, how painful and rejecting and lonely this can feel. And I want to also say the same for men who find themselves married to women who are not attracted to them. Meaning, I think we focused a little too much on the collateral damage of women. I don't believe it's less collateral damage for men who find out that their wives are attracted to other women. And maybe a woman, because of her biology, can go through the motions, right? Karka olam, we say when we talk about Esther in the Purim story that's coming out, right? That a woman can be passive in the sexual act. But how many men want partners that are not attracted to them or repulsed by them or are going through the motions just to get through the act, to have children or whatever it is? And I don't think there's less collateral damage there as well in terms of sexual identity for the man, in terms of his attitude towards his sexuality and feeling welcomed and encouraged by his wife. And so the collateral damage is across the board for husbands, for wives, for children, who find themselves in a situation that they were told would be okay, and then it really wasn't okay. And that makes me angry. I started off by saying I'm very understanding of the contentiousness, of the challenge, of the painfulness, of the foundational aspect of what it means for us to begin to really think thoughtfully about what we want for the LGBTQ members of our community, what we want for them in terms of committed relationships, in terms of family structure, right? That's really challenging. It makes me angry that we've used the religious structure to kind of shy away from clearly looking at what the fallout looks like and not using our Jewish values, and more than that, our mitzvot, right, to protect one another from harm, from bringing a foundational respect, a kvod habriot, a human dignity element to the conversation, not to mention v'ahavta l'reach kamocha, lo tamod al dam reacha. In other words, we have mitzvot that are beyond whether a man marries a man and has a sexual act, like beyond the sexual laws. And we sometimes forget it because sexuality tends to eclipse all other conversations, who's doing what with whom and what act are they doing. And I really think we would do well if we constructed more of the conversations using many of the amazing mitzvot that we have and halachot we have to talk about behavior and language and Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh, we're all responsible. I mean, we have so many of these that we trot out all the time from the time children are little. And then when we need to use them, we push them to the side, and all we can focus on is the transgressiveness of a particular act. And that really, I think, is unsustainable and does not reflect well on what we could be doing, even as we don't go, again, for those who are not ready, uncomfortable, rabbinic authorities, and they're legitimizing, halachically legitimizing certain things. No one's asking everyone to do halachic legitimacy. That is going to be a long-term, right, a long-term conversation that will unfold as it unfolds. But in parallel, we certainly can be having very important conversations, education, awareness, acceptance, and so on and so forth on the communal level, and we're not doing enough of that. So I'm going to pause there.
Thank you, Rabbanit Nechama. I'm just seeing some questions in the chat that we can just park for another time. One of them is, how prevalent is this? I don't know what the question of prevalence is. I just want to say that there is a much keener awareness in younger generations. And as a parent of teenage girls, I like to think that we foster open dialogue in our home. My kids watch TV, and so they see people of all identities, gender identities, sexual orientation, racial identities, et cetera, et cetera. Like it is a much different experience watching TV in 2022 than it was in 1982. So I just want to park that for a second, but I want to note that we have among us and people who will be watching this after, we have educators and we have clergy and we have psychologists and we have lay leaders and active community members and interested parties. And Shani, I want to pose the question to you. What is it that we need to know? What would have made your lives better as you were going through this massive transition in your own life?
Gosh, it's such a loaded question. Honestly, so I very briefly gave you a little glimpse before we started this, and I mentioned how I grew up in an Orthodox community in Chicago, and I lived there after I was married for several years. And when my husband at the time came out to me, we felt that it was not safe for us to everything, to navigate, to open up, to have it all unfold in that community that we were in. We felt very scared. And so we felt the need to pick everybody up and leave and go to another community where nobody knew us. And we can, set the bounds and the rules and everything ourselves. And we can also open up to our children and have this discussion with our children on our own terms, and in an environment where they weren't going to be bombarded by people who knew us as community members with their own opinions. Because I will say that after it became public, to my husband, or to all of us, really, I got a lot of feedback of, it was very extreme in both ways. One way it was, you have to leave him. And the other way was, you have to stay for the children, no matter how miserable you are. And I think that what I would have loved to have had at that time was, instead of advice on what I need to do, it would have been more, what do you need? What do you need from us? What do your children need? What do you think your children need? How can we help ease this extremely difficult journey that you are now on? And I did not get that. I got it from maybe 2 people, maybe. And as a result, I then went, I fell very, very deeply into therapy, which was huge, and it saved my life. And, so I'm very thankful for that, because without it, I don't think I would have been able to navigate the part that involves my children, because they did not have the tools and they did not have a community to help, love them and bring them in and hold them through their journey. And sadly, a couple of my children suffered. I mean, all of my children suffered in their own way, but some were a little bit more difficult than others. One of my children chose to use drugs and drink and black out so that he wouldn't have to deal with anything. And of course, along with everything that he was dealing with, there's also just the aspect of being an addict and being in denial of being an addict, and all the years that comes along with that, until he was willing to accept help to get out of that. And then once he did accept the help, it was unpacking all that baggage of, why did I feel like that was my only choice? Like that was my only path that I could take to disappear, So that opened up a whole nother can of worms, because then it was family therapy time, and we had to, open all of that up again. And Shimi was involved, my ex-husband was involved, and I was involved, and it was difficult, to put it extremely mildly. But, and then I have a transgender son who is going through his own, thank God he has a family who loves him, and it's, but like my whole family is still yeshivish and Orthodox, and it's awkward. They don't know enough to know how to relate. And again, that's where I feel like knowledge is so much power. Like the knowledge has to get out there so that people just know how to communicate. Like Nechama was saying about the Ben Adam L'Chavero thing, just on a human level, just to know how to interact, instead of avoid, or instead of say the wrong thing that could be misconstrued and be offensive. And it's so important to just have those human skills of communication. And like Nechama was saying, I completely agree. The thing that I've always said, people have asked me, like, why don't you hate your ex-husband for what he did? I don't hate him. It wasn't his choice. I had a great marriage. We have a great relationship. Everything's been great. I don't hate him for something that he had no control over. I hate the system that didn't give him room to be who he needed to be. And at the end of the day, it's not my place to hate anyone, not even the system. I believe that at some point, everybody's going to meet their maker, and they're going to have to take it up at that point. I think that our job right now is not to judge, and not even for the rabbis to say, you cannot be gay or you cannot marry a same-sex partner, or, you can or you can't. I personally think that that's wrong. I think it's much more important to say, how can we help you? How can we be supportive to help you navigate in this very difficult world that you want to be part of? That's what I would have wished for. So
I'll just chime in if that's okay, Daphne, on the, what we're doing at Eshel, and also I know that Jofa is working on this as well, is to make space in Orthodoxy for everybody to live a full, realized, actualized life in their communities and not have to leave and not have to disrupt other people's lives to be truly who they are. And, Elisheva is asking, that you appreciate that this film was made and that, it seems a little like 10 years ago. And some places, maybe, especially in Israel, but also in the Haredi community here, it's very today. However, so much work is being done. Like, we are pounding the pavement through our Welcoming Shuls and Welcoming Schools project. And I saw here amongst the attendees, Dr. Shoni Epstein, who is the head of those projects. And we have gotten so many calls throughout the pandemic of children who are coming out. And part of the theory is that they had time to be at home to express themselves fully without having to get dressed in a whatever dress code they had to get dressed in, and just be themselves. And when they came back to school, they were coming out in greater numbers. There was also a question about what's the percentage. It's hard to say, but I would say somewhere, around, we're hovering about 10, 12% of people coming out as LGBTQ or on a gender and sexuality spectrum. And I like to remind people that we are all on a spectrum. And so I think that, kids are coming out as non-binary, and people are like, what's this non-binary thing? This doesn't exist, especially not in Orthodoxy. What is it? And I believe that it's a social movement, that children are challenging our notions of gender, which is good for us. This is good for the Jews. This is good for Jofa. This is good for Eshel, that these notions are being challenged. And they're saying the gender binary, what you think a girl is and what you think a boy is, that is not who I am. And I am something else. There are other things going on, and I can't fully speak to the experience because it's not my lived experience. But I do believe that it's an opening in society, in the Orthodox community. We're getting calls from people, from educators, from camp directors, because they have no idea where to put the kid who is identifying as non-binary. And it's a fascinating question. What do we do? Just to remind people, in the Talmud, the rabbis acknowledged that there were about 7 or maybe 9 genders, mostly based on the body, biologically. So it's not the same as the way we talk about gender today. But they had their minds open and they were like, wow, not everybody's the same. And I think that that's the lesson that we can learn from, the rabbis of the Chazal. But I just want to say, we aren't where we were 10 years ago, and we aren't where where the film depicts in every Orthodox community. And I just want to say that it's great. And there's a lot of wonderful communities out there. Check out the Welcoming Schools and Welcoming Shuls project. Reach out to Dr. Shoni Epstein about it. If you're looking for a place for your child who just came out, or a school, we can help you find something that will hopefully fit. But it's a lot of work. The work isn't done. Sometimes I feel like we're pushing those gigantic boulders uphill every day. But I feel like it's good news. It's getting better.
Can I chime in one more second, please, if that's okay?
Yeah,
I see that somebody just posted in the chat a pretty important point, which kind of hits home for me. One of the audience members said, "Can someone just mention pikuach nefesh and sakanat nefashot?" And I think that this is really important, that pikuach nefesh and sakanat nefashot, about the danger of risking one's life or committing, there sadly, so many LGBTQ community members have committed suicide, and so many more have attempted. And I can tell you that my ex-husband attempted several times. Between the time that he came out to me and the time that he came out publicly. And it's a very, very real thing. And obviously there are so many reasons that awareness is so important, but if for no other reason than this, I can't imagine that anybody could have an issue with saying that we should ignore this. No one should ever feel that they are so lost or so alone in any situation, LGBTQ or otherwise, that they should resort to harming themselves or committing suicide or attempting it or anything like that. It's a very, very scary thing. And that also has such a domino effect. It's not, it's, of course, it's horrible when a person commits suicide, but then the effect that has on their family. And my biggest fear was that my husband would actually succeed. And what would that do to my children? And nobody should ever go through that. So I do think that that's a really important point to bring up as well.
Yeah, and I think that is one of the portals into education and awareness.
Yeah, of course.
That's one way in which communities or rabbis, there was an unfortunate suicide in a community near mine, and the rabbi immediately after opened it up, and the whole community came. He was a very renowned rabbi and talked a lot about the responsibility. In this case, it was more complicated. It wasn't because of the community, and it wasn't because he wasn't accepted by his family. It was a very tragic story, but not directly the fault of lack of religious acceptance. But the rabbi used that as an opportunity, with the permission of the family, to let's open up these conversations. So that actually is an unfortunate, but it is an entry point. Unfortunately, it sometimes happens after there's a tragedy, but more and more you are finding that, especially if you want to get people to listen, bringing the statistics globally of what the pain of rejection and shunning and loneliness can do in that community can be a starting point if done, again, with responsibility and with, I would always say, rabbis and therapists working together. I think that's the ideal combination, where the therapeutic community and the rabbinic community work together on these very sensitive situations. And you're absolutely right. It is more appropriate to say died by suicide. Thank you. I've been made aware of that more recently. Someone asked me what Miriam was referring to in referring to different genders in the Talmud. I see she gave an article that referred, but in Bikurim, in short, there is a description of people who are both male and female, and which part of them is reflected in halachic obligation. And so there are different, what we would probably call, what I think intersex is the correct formulation. In the time of the Talmud, they called it androgynous. And there was also a tumtum. There's an awareness that there are people who are neither male nor female, or both male and female. And so the Kabbalah already, and then onward, began to look at people who are not fitting into the binary. So that's what she was talking about.
Thank you. I want to be mindful of time. We had some questions come in before, and I'm just going to pose the question because it's come up a few times. I also want to note, actually, before I ask the question, people still ask, are we still here? Are we still having this conversation 20 years later, 10 years later, 5 years later, today, next week? And the answer is, we will always be having these conversations. And I don't think it's a bad thing to be having the conversations. It means that we're, advancing the conversation ahead. But this is a question that I'm going to leave it open, and we'll see who wants to answer. In this emphasis to push the importance of marriage, which I think can be so incredibly damaging for people who are not interested in getting married, but for people who want companionship, what are your thoughts on a gay man and a lesbian woman who are friends, marrying each other and living together as roommates, and then, having their lives either, separately?
I'll start by saying I know that it's quite controversial here. There is a rabbi who very much advocates for that. and that is looked at with great suspicion by the community, by the LGBT, largely because it's felt it's fulfilling religious agenda and so on. However, I would say that if, I know gay men who have had children with straight women. Now they're not living together, but they're raising children together, for instance, right? So if a gay man and a man and a woman who have same-sex attraction, or someone in the trans community, right, chooses to have a non-sexual relationship with a partner in order to create a family structure, and it is absolutely with an awareness as much as possible, as anyone going into a marriage or a partnership can be aware, that on a small scale, I don't think I would protest that. I'm curious to know what other members of the panel have to say. However, I don't think it should be presented as an idealized solution, because ultimately what you're asking people to do is give up on their sexuality, right? To be in an asexual or non-sexual relationship for people who are not necessarily asexual. Right. In the same way, if two asexual people got married, I wouldn't force them to have sexual relations in order to have a child, which again is right. So people can make choices about what their relationships are going to look like. But they're obviously, if an asexual person marries a sexual person, that's going to be a very complicated relationship where one person. So, I think it has to be scaled down. But I don't think I would, take a stand against it.
I think the question.
I think it's a, go ahead.
Sorry. The question is, does it work? And of all the couples that I know who have attempted to get together and do that, I know one where it did work, but many where it didn't work. And I assume it's because the two people were possibly bisexual and, drawn to each other. But in general, when people, and we get a lot of phone calls about this, can you introduce me to somebody of the opposite sex so I can live with them? And I'm assuming they're going to have outside relationships. And so, that doesn't feel right, and we just don't, we've never really heard it working well. And the greater question is, like the Rabbinic said, like, is asexuality something that we want? Is that a Jewish value, to force somebody to not express themselves in that way, if that's what their natural tendency is? And I think, is it a Torah value to have, an expression of sexuality?
Dr. Bendheim.
Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable opining on this, because I really feel like it's a particular technical solution to a non-technical problem. That we're talking about deep issues of intimacy and identity and sexuality, and to just like figure out, well, this person is this way and this person is this way. Should we encourage them to get together, or will that work? How do we know whether it's going to work or not? I mean, what does work mean? This is about things that are not tangible in that way. And so, first of all, I don't feel like I can opine on it. It's more, if it works, if people want to build a family more than they want to honor their own sexual drives, that's their prerogative. They can, and okay, so that quote works. But I just don't feel like I could come out with a judgment about it personally.
I just hinging on what Dr. Bendheim said, I agree also, like if that's what somebody wants to do, then who am I to say no? However, I'm then asking why? Why do they want to take that road? What is compelling them to feel like that's the only road that's available to them in order to have a family? That's where my brain goes. And I want to know why. Why does that seems sad to me. And again, if that's a choice that those individuals want to make for themselves, that's absolutely more power to them. But if they feel like that's their only option towards having a family, that hurts my heart. And I want to know why they feel that that's their only option.
And I think the reason they feel that way is because that's what we're telling them.
Yes, that's my point. That's exactly my point. That's why this is so important, to get it out there, to let them know that it doesn't have to be that way.
Full circle.
Yes.
Thank you. Miriam, I want to give you the floor for a minute or two to share some resources about Eshel. We put some in the chat. They will go out in a follow-up email as well. And then I know that there are people who might be interested or who are interested in bringing the film to their own community. We've invited Rabbi Greenberg to come and visit with people or to exchange information after this webinar. So Miriam, why don't you go ahead?
Sure. So again, thank you so much, Daphne and the women at JOFA for inviting us into this discussion. It's so incredibly important. I was at the conference in 1997, was it, where the very first discussion like this happened, and here we are again. Hopefully it's in a different place. So at Eshel, I just want everyone to know what we do. What we first do is support people where they're at and their families. And so we have a very wonderful, we call it the Eshel Mishpacha, and a lot of you are here in attendance. And we're a family of people who support each other, especially people who feel like they cannot get that support from inside their Orthodox communities. So we've become like an alternative community for many people. We have a lot of support groups. We have friend networks, WhatsApp groups to support people all along the way, and parents of LGBTQ people. And we also have the Welcoming Shuls Project, where we are working with Orthodox rabbis across America and North America, 240 of them so far on our list. And you can reach out to us. It doesn't mean that every shul is 100% welcoming. Actually, no shul, I would want to say, maybe except for one or two, is 100% what we would consider welcoming, but it's a start and we're working with them. And welcoming schools, you know, working with people who are struggling with their child in school to keep them in the school of their choice, and, you know, to find the place that is most appropriate for them so that we don't have to lose people from Orthodoxy. You know, with the parent community, after a while, the parent is over the shock of their kid coming out, the next thing we hear after a year or so is, but they're no longer religious. And that just breaks my heart. And there's no reason for that. You know, I understand why they're coming out and they have to be who they are, but there's no reason for them to lose their tradition, which we've worked so hard to instill in them. So that is our goal, to keep people within the fold and happy and living full-fledged Orthodox lives, traditional lives, where they can be
Beautiful.
actualized.
I'm mindful of Dr. Bendheim and Rabbi Nechama's time because I know that they need to hop off. So I want to thank you for joining, for participating and leading this conversation, for driving this conversation forward in communities really around the world. And I look forward to our continued work together. I'm going to invite, if people want to put into the chat, and also, of course, Miriam, thank you. And Shani, thank you. If people want to stay and put their information into the chat in order to find out about bringing this film into their own community or their institution, I invite you to do so. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today.